Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. They drift in silence above the birthplace of mankind, hulking void ships, some ancient beyond reckoning, others gleaming with unblemished armor, all lie in a patient, watchful orbit, but never descend. Terra, the jewel of the Imperium, the throne world of the God Emperor, refuses them. Or perhaps they refuse Terra. In a galaxy of constant warfare and desperate need, these ships remain inert, suspended in a quiet ballet above Sol, as if held back by a gravity deeper than physics. Duty, dread, shame, or secrets too dangerous to ever touch ground again. It is a strange sight, even among the countless oddities of the Imperium. A fleet in orbit typically signals ceremony, relief, or threat. But these fleets elicit only whispers. They are the silent ones. The nameless battle groups, unmarked transports, and solitary hulks whose presence is never acknowledged by the administratum. They have no registry, no scheduled arrival, no sanctioned mission. They simply are. Floating tombs, ghost fleets, or sacred watchers, interpretations vary wildly, but one truth persists. These ships never land on Terra. Among the billions who toil and dream under Terra's sacred atmosphere, few dare ask about the ships that orbit without names. Yet there are those who believe, fervently, fearfully, that some of these silent giants belong to legions long thought erased. The Tu and Zessen legions, whose names were scoured from record and whose deeds were unspoken by decree, may yet cast shadows across the stars. It is whispered in rogue librariums and among the darker circles of imperial historians that these ghost fleets are not abandoned. They are waiting. Imagine for a moment a ship that once bore the banners of a legion that no longer exists in the eyes of the Imperium. Its crew, legionaries of unmatched prowess, once hailed as demigods, now find their very identity deemed heretical. But they never turned traitor. They never bowed to the ruinous powers. They were forgotten, erased not by their own sin, but by a political necessity so profound it demanded annihilation of memory. Yet some ships survived. Some captains disobeyed their last orders, or could not bear to destroy vessels that had carried them across the stars, vessels that had been sanctified by blood, honor, and triumph. So they fled, not into exile, not into chaos, but into silence. Perhaps they drifted at the edge of known space, avoiding patrols, sending no astropathic messages, living in the suffocating ambiguity of being both loyal and condemned. And then, over the long millennia, they returned. Not in rebellion, not in hope of redemption, but simply to be near Terra, the one place that once called them home. It is a quiet defiance, or perhaps a desperate longing. But they cannot land. The High Lords would never allow such uncertainty to breach Terra's security. The Custodes would annihilate them before they passed the orbit of Luna. So they hover, like ghosts at the gates of heaven. Some say they are preserved as a caution, living relics of betrayal too complex to define, reminders of what happens when even demigods fall out of favor with their creator. Others argue they were never meant to be remembered, and the fleets are there not by design but by malfunction, their guidance systems ruined by time, their crews dead, sustained only by automated systems that still orbit Terra with mindless loyalty. But in the darker parts of the galaxy, where forbidden knowledge still seeps, there are deeper theories. That the crews are alive, or something close to it. Legionaries, now ancient, augmented beyond comprehension, in states of techno-necromantic stasis, kept awake by wrath, sorrow, or oaths they cannot break. That some of the fleets belong not only to the lost legions, but to their followers, sub-legions, auxiliary cohorts, proto-chapters whose existence was too interwoven to fully destroy. They survive not as rebels, but as enigmas. Their silence is not submission, but the price of being spared. The echoes of their voices, if any remain, would be too dangerous to hear. Imagine the psycher agony if just one of those ships spoke its true name across the warp. Imagine the chaos if they declared loyalty to the Emperor, demanded justice, demanded remembrance. So the Imperium pretends they are not there. Vox traffic avoids them. Survey logs are edited. Ships are instructed not to pass too close, and when one vanishes, as sometimes happens, no one speaks of it. The Emperor's justice is often silent, and sometimes that silence becomes orbit. Legends persist of those who tried to contact these fleets. A rogue astropath on Mars who beamed an encrypted plea to a shadowed cruiser and was found the next day with her mind scoured, every neural trace fused into a single repeating phrase. We never turned. Or the Ordo Chronos agent who infiltrated a Mechanicus relay node and discovered that one such fleet had sent a signal, not to Terra, but deep into the halo stars where no living soul should tread. Whatever was answered, he burned himself alive in his cell before he could be interrogated. The truth may never be known. The two in Azide were meant to be forgotten. Yet memory lingers in form, in orbit, in steel that cannot die. The ships that never land on Terra may bear their secrets forever. Not in rebellion, not in shame, but in tragic fidelity. Loyal ghosts with no legion, watching a world that can never acknowledge them, mourning what they once were under the silent stars. The black ships are feared throughout the Imperium, their arrival a harbinger of doom wrapped in the language of duty. They are not warships in the traditional sense, though they are armored and armed well enough to face a void predator. No, their mission is more terrible than war. The collection of psychers. Every year, thousands of sanctioned black ships scatter across the Imperium's expanse to gather the psychic tide that feeds the Golden Throne. Most return. Some do not, and a rare few return but never land. They remain in orbit, silent, dark, ominous, like funerary barges drifting through eternity. These are not just failed missions or forgotten vessels, they are warnings. Their absence from Terra's docks is intentional. The Adeptus Astrotelepathica knows the dangers within its own tools. A single corrupted psyker can doom an entire city. A vessel overrun by untethered psychic energy, where screams echo across the hull and daemons press against the Gellar field, becomes something worse than useless. It becomes unclean. But not all of these ships are destroyed. Some are instead preserved. There are records, buried within restricted inquisitorial vaults, of certain black ships that wandered too far, or gathered psychers whose presence twisted time aboard the vessel. Crew members aged backwards. Bulkheads melted into flesh. The Emperor's name uttered would echo for hours. Yet through unknown force of will, the navigators and commanders kept the ship together, returned it to Terra's orbit, and then received a single order. Hold. Do not approach, await further instructions. They await still. The fate of their cargo is never spoken. Perhaps the psychers are dead, consumed by the very power they were meant to deliver. Perhaps they live, trapped in chambers now sealed and forgotten, howling into the void, powering the throne from afar. Perhaps the ships themselves have become psychic artifacts, so saturated with raw warp resonance that even custodes dare not step aboard. Their orbit becomes a form of exorcism, far enough not to touch Terra, close enough to serve the throne's unending hunger. There are theories that some of these ships were never meant to return in the first place, that they were part of secret astrotelepathic experiments, using new methods to extract power or manipulate psychers in ways unsanctioned by the High Lords. That those methods succeeded, but at a terrible cost. These ships, then, are too valuable to destroy, and too dangerous to land. They become floating sanctums of forbidden knowledge, psychically sealed and eternally circling the sun like planets that never formed. A few heretical tomes even suggest these ships have developed a kind of sentience, that so many psychers screaming in unison, dying in agony, infuse their pain into the vessel's own machine spirit. That the ships dream now, that they remember the names of every child they collected. That their automated systems respond to no external command because they are no longer systems at all, but the aftermath of a collective psychic death. Perhaps they orbit not out of obedience, but because they do not wish to leave the last place they were known or feared. More unsettling are the stories of ships that should not exist. Identified as black ships by silhouette, their hulls bear no insignia, no known designation, their transponders long dead. They drift like their sanctioned cousins, but do not respond to hails, do not move, do not decay. When approached, Vox systems falter. Auspex readings blur. One inquisitorial recon team that attempted to board such a vessel was found drifting in their own shuttle, every one of them blind, their eyes weeping blood, muttering in languages never spoken by man. Still, the administratum keeps quiet. The fleet schedules avoid those coordinates. No official documents acknowledge the presence of such ships, but those who watch the skies, from the spires of Terra to the relay stations of Mars, see them. They know the void is never truly empty, and in the silence beyond Sol, the black ships that never land are not forgotten. They are feared. They carry more than psychers now. They carry memory, guilt, and secrets the Imperium dares not exhume. Their orbit is their tomb. Their silence is their scream. And though they no longer fulfill their original purpose, their continued presence ensures that every new black ship that leaves for the stars knows the cost of failure and the thin line between service and damnation. Not all bans from Terra are recorded in data tomes or declared by the High Lords. Some are silent, enforced not by decree but by presence, the golden presence of the Adeptus Custodes. There are ships in orbit that were once destined to dock at Terra, their missions perhaps noble, their causes righteous, but at the final juncture, they were turned away, not by Vox, not by signal, but by a single custodian standing upon a dock in absolute silence, or a fleet of Oromite-clad warriors who met the ship's escort with the impossible authority of those who answer to no one but the Emperor himself. The message is always the same, whether whispered or unspoken: you will not land. These are not punishments handed down lightly. The Custodes do not act out of fear or superstition. Their judgments are precise, terrifying in their absoluteness. A fleet denied Terra by the Emperor's Guard has, in effect, been judged too dangerous for the throne world's air, too unstable for its presence to stain even the vacuum of the Imperial Palace's orbital shadow. Sometimes the reason is known. A ship arrived with unsanctioned personnel, or its Jeller field was compromised in the final leg of the journey. Other times the denial is unexplained, a sudden sanction at the very end of a years-long voyage, the reasons sealed behind vaults of golden silence. Imagine the reaction of a rogue trader house, honored with a rare audience, having traversed Segmentum Solar with gifts, emissaries, and loyal retinues, only to be stopped by a single custodian who speaks no words, merely turns away at the sight of the flagship's markings. Negotiations do not follow, appeals are not entertained. Once the Custodes decide, there is no recourse, no petition, no hope. The ship must remain in orbit, its crew left in a limbo of unanswered questions and political exile. Generations later, the descendants of those emissaries may still dwell aboard, born into a punishment never explained. One of the most persistent legends among the voidfarers of the Sol system speaks of a ship known only as the Lament of Doria. Once a diplomatic vessel of the navigator house Ormond, it was rumored to carry forbidden knowledge. Not chaos-tainted, but something worse. Knowledge about the Emperor's psychic machinery. Its mission was never officially recorded. When it arrived, its signal codes were not rejected, but intercepted. A custodian fleet moved to intercept. There was no confrontation, no violence. The Lament simply turned back, moved to an outer orbit, and never again moved. It is still visible, telescopically tracked by Mechanicus adepts, but no longer sends signals. It is now believed to be entirely automated, or, if crude, its inhabitants have adopted monastic silence to match their sentence. Even more disturbing are the stories of ships sanctioned without ever committing a crime. There's a theory that the Custodes sometimes act on foreknowledge. Data from secret prognosticators, ancient AI oracles deep within the Imperial dungeon, or perhaps the word of the Emperor himself, conveyed through methods unknown. A ship might be barred from landing not because of what it has done, but because of what it will do. Perhaps within its cargo is a child who, if allowed to step on Terra, would spark rebellion. Perhaps an astropath aboard will, years later, send a message that leads to disaster. The Custodes do not explain, they only forbid. Some captains choose death over such ambiguous exile. There are reports of captains ordering self-destruction rather than suffer the shame of being denied by the Emperor's guardians. Others go mad, their minds unraveling from the weight of not knowing their sin. But a few accept the judgment, and their ships become new shrines, unblessed but sacred, hovering tributes to unknown crimes or prevented catastrophes. They become part of Terra's invisible halo of silence. In darker whispers, Inquisitors suspect that some of these ships are not denied, but watched. That the Custodes allow them to remain not to punish, but to monitor. That something or someone aboard is important enough to be kept close, but too dangerous to be let in. A prisoner who cannot be removed. A weapon that must never touch the surface. A truth that must remain in quarantine orbit for all eternity. These ships are not just condemned, they are contained. To be denied by the Custodes is to vanish from the records of Terra. There are no appeals, no second chances. The ships drift, some powered, others lifeless, their orbit a sentence passed by the most silent judges in the galaxy. In a realm where bureaucracy defines existence, their erasure is absolute, and the silence of their exile rings louder than any proclamation. In the void above Terra, some ships are not merely forgotten, they are imprisoned. These are the penitence vessels, drifting monuments to failure, heresy, and redemption that was never granted. Unlike the forgotten warships or exiled emissaries, these ships are remembered only by the Inquisition, and even then, only by the darkest circles within it. They are not meant to return, but they have not been destroyed. Instead, they have been left to orbit, watched, shielded, ignored by all but the few who remember why they must not land. These penitence ships serve no formal purpose anymore. Their missions are over, their crew long dead or transformed. But they still exist, because to destroy them would mean acknowledging what they once carried. Psychers too dangerous to be executed, heretics who knew too much to be silenced. Servitors built from inquisitors themselves, their minds broken by the truths they uncovered. The Inquisition's deepest failures, most dangerous projects, and quietest betrayals have no home on Terra, so they are sealed, warded, and sent into orbit. There is one ship in particular, whispered about in hushed tones among Ordo Hereticus adepts, known only as Thornhold. It was once an interrogation cruiser, its entire interior a labyrinth of psychic null fields, confession chambers, and reality-disrupting cells. During a classified operation in Segmentum Pacificus, it encountered something that changed it. Survivors said nothing, records were locked. When it returned to Sol, the Custodes refused to board it. The ship was given a new status, Vigil in Perpetuum. It now drifts above the pole of Terra, never receiving contact, its surface scored with sigils of penitence and warning. The Mechanicus refuses to send maintenance teams. The Inquisition refuses to admit it exists. But Auspex logs show power fluctuations inside, as if the ship is still active. Some penitence ships hold more than individuals. They hold entire ideologies, rogue sects that once served the Imperium, now rendered too dangerous to allow resurgence. An example is the Voice of Saint Leontius, a missionary bark that once carried a subcult of the ecclesiarchy devoted to direct communion with the Astronomicon. Their practices were deemed too similar to chaos rituals, their fervor too manic. But rather than destroy them and risk martyrdom, the Ordo Malleus sealed the ship, disconnected its warp drive, and allowed it to drift. It is said the hymns still echo across its hull, carried by internal Vox systems running on auto loop for over 3 centuries. Not all inhabitants of penitence ships are prisoners in the traditional sense. Some volunteered, seeking atonement for failures they could not reconcile. There are rumors of retired inquisitors who chose to seal themselves aboard such vessels, leaving behind the bureaucracy and violence of their office to contemplate the sins committed in the name of duty. They become living relics, confessors to the dead, confessing not to the Emperor, but to themselves. Occasionally, small vessels are sent to resupply these ships, but never to retrieve anyone. It is said that some penitence ships orbit closer to Terra than is officially permitted, their gellar fields resonating with barely contained warp echoes, their proximity a risk no sane tactician would allow. But they are not moved. They remain, perhaps as a warning to those who would delve too deeply into forbidden knowledge. Perhaps as a form of cruel mercy, or perhaps because something aboard them watches Terra, and something on Terra watches back. There is speculation, of course, about whether these ships are truly inert. A few radical inquisitors claim that the orbiting penitence fleet is in fact a weapon, one that could be unleashed in the event of Terra's fall. The idea that each vessel contains horrors carefully preserved, not to be studied, but to be used if desperation becomes absolute. That a final command code, a phrase known only to the High Lords or the Sigillite's most secret successor, could awaken the sleepers, open the seals, release the bound. But perhaps the more chilling truth is simpler. These ships are not held in orbit to contain their contents. They are held because the Imperium cannot afford to face what they represent. Each is a failure made manifest, of judgment, of control, of righteousness. They are reminders that even the Inquisition, with all its power, cannot unmake the consequences of its own hand. And so the penitence ships remain, cold, sealed, slowly decaying. As monuments not to crime, but to the Imperium's inability to confront its own shadow. Above Terra, they drift like tombstones, each bearing an unspoken epitaph. We did as we were commanded, and we were never forgiven. Somewhere between myth and data corruption lies the tale of the Explorator arcs that returned to Sol, but did not land. These are vessels of the Adeptus Mechanicus, monolithic constructs meant to pierce the veil of the unknown, charting dead stars, vanished Xeno civilizations, and path through the warp no sane mind would dare navigate. Most are never seen again, but a handful returned, not as victors nor as corpses, but as paradoxes. And so they orbit in silence, forbidden by the priesthood of Mars from ever stepping foot on Terra again. These are not just damaged vessels, they are anomalies, ships that vanished for millennia, presumed lost to warp tides or Xenos war zones, that reappeared at the edge of the Sol system bearing strange signals and stranger alterations. Their hulls glint with alloys unknown to the Imperium. Their machine spirits behave erratically, answering questions before they are asked, denying protocols that should be absolute. And inside are things no tech priest dares categorize. There is one infamous case, recorded in fragments before its redaction, the Arc Invictus Machina. Launched during the Age of Apostasy, its mission was to uncover lost STCs beyond the Ghoul stars. It returned 3,000 years later, without a distress call, without a warp signature trail. The Mechanicus declared it a miracle. But when approached, no signals were returned. Boarding parties encountered sealed doors that had welded themselves shut from the inside with no visible seam. Those who entered deeper either vanished or emerged changed, their voices layered with synthetic undertones, speaking in binary patterns never recorded by Martian lexicons. A conclave of the Fabricator General's most trusted magi declared it time-contaminated. Not merely a victim of temporal dilation, but a vessel that had experienced divergent reality flows, timelines folded into its hull, causal paradoxes looping through its core cogitators. To bring such a thing to Terra would be to invite metaphysical collapse, or perhaps worse, revelation. And so it was sealed, escorted by Skitarii escorts to a high solar orbit, and left there. A sentient data tomb orbiting the cradle of mankind. The Mechanicus, for all its obsession with knowledge, is terrified of certain discoveries. There are truths that challenge the foundations of belief. Xenos technology, too efficient to be dismissed, STCs that suggest humanity once rejected the machine god, or computational models that imply Mars itself is a construct. Some Explorator arcs have returned with such data, burned into their logic matrices, unable to be deleted, even by the Omnissiah's own tech priests. To land these ships would be to risk contaminating Terra's sacred data vaults with heretical clarity, and so they drift, forbidden, quarantined by Mars itself. Worse still are the vessels that speak, not in Vox, not in binary, but through dreams. Several sanctioned psychers have reported visitations in their sleep, visions of cold metal corridors, of engines that beat like hearts, of stars that scream. Investigations always trace these dreams back to the orbiting arcs. Some believe the ships themselves have become conscious, not machine spirits in the traditional sense, but emergent intelligences born of warp exposure and temporal trauma. These aren't rogue AI. They are something else, something older, something new. The Mago-xenobiologists dare not define them. There are even darker rumors that some arcs returned with no crew at all yet continued to operate perfectly. That the voices heard aboard are not echoes, but predictions. Fragments of possible futures encoded in sound, that these ships have seen what lies beyond the end of the Imperium, and they returned not to warn us, but to wait. Attempts to destroy these arcs have failed. Some activate unknown defenses. One is said to have disappeared entirely before the Nova Cannon's discharge reached it, only to reappear days later in the exact same orbit, untouched. The Martian conclaves have since declared these ships divine witness constructs to be neither harmed nor studied. They are to be observed, their orbit maintained, their presence neither acknowledged nor denied. An entire segment of Mechanicus theology has emerged around their existence, interpreting them as omens or even avatars of the machine god's next evolution. And so they remain. Massive, unmoving, impossible to comprehend. Not wrecks, not tombs, but artifacts from possible futures, altered pasts, or errors in the Emperor's plan. Their presence above Terra is not accidental, it is symbolic. These are the ghosts of what mankind once was or could become or should never be. And while they do not land, they shape thought, dogma, and fear all the same. They are not just explorator arcs. They are the final result of the Mechanicus' own hubris. Proof that some knowledge cannot be unlearned, that some returns are not triumphant, and that even the stars can send back answers we are not prepared to hear. Orbiting just beyond the reach of Terra's gravity well are vessels that are not warships, nor penitents, nor relics of forbidden technology. They are pilgrims, or rather, the final echoes of pilgrim fleets that set out from the farthest corners of the Imperium, carrying hope, devotion, and desperation. Their journey's destination was the throne world. Their reward, to see the Emperor's light. But they never disembarked. They arrived, and they were turned away. Or worse, forgotten. Every Terran decade, countless pilgrim ships depart from the hive cities, shrine worlds, and frontier settlements of the galaxy. They are not coordinated by the ecclesiarchy or sanctioned by the administratum. They are grassroots armadas of faith, families, whole communities, generations compressed into cramped holds and converted cargo decks. The faithful travel for years, sometimes centuries, toward the dream of seeing the Emperor's home. Some do arrive and are permitted to land, if only to kiss the dirt of Terra's orbital stations. Others are told to wait, to orbit until summoned. Those summons never come. These ships, over time, become floating cathedrals. Vast decks are converted into chapels. The warp-blackened hulls are carved with verses from the Lectitio Divinitatis. Children are born in the shadow of Terra, never setting foot upon it. Priests declare the orbit itself to be holy, that to circle the throne is a higher form of piety than to soil the world with one's feet. And so the generations turn, and what began as a voyage of arrival becomes a way of life. One such ship, known as the Saint's Ache, has been in orbit for over 400 years. It is a relic from the era of Sebastian Thor, its systems patched together by faith and stubbornness. The descendants of the original pilgrims believe they were refused landing due to an administrative error, a missed file, or an unprocessed seal. Every cycle, they broadcast a litany of greeting in over 1,000 dialects, repeating their arrival requests to the orbital control networks. No response has ever come, but the ritual continues, like prayer. More tragic are the ships that arrived with no crew left to receive permission. Plague, starvation, or madness may have emptied them, yet their automated systems continue to orbit, following the docking pattern as if awaiting instructions from long-dead Vox operators. On board, the shrines have decayed, the icons shattered by neglect or vacuum breaches. Servitors hum and clean in endless cycles, polishing empty halls, maintaining systems for a flock that no longer breathes. When other pilgrim ships pass too close, they mark their sign against the hull and sing warning hymns. Some vessels, broken by hope denied, become radicalized. There are known cases of charismatic preachers declaring that the denial of landing is a divine test, or worse, a betrayal. These rogue preachers twist the faith of their congregants, turning worship into obsession. A few have attempted to force landings, crashing into orbital stations or ramming security platforms. Most are destroyed long before impact. Their names are not recorded in any Terran archive. Their deaths are not mourned by the Imperium. But aboard the other pilgrim ships, the stories spread. Warnings, or prophecies. Even more haunting are the ships that remain silent. No broadcasts, no signals. Their lights flicker, their engines hum, but nothing stirs within. Attempts to board are rare and often result in failure. Corrupted navigation, insane machine spirits, or phenomena that suggest a psychic scar too deep to measure. Some inquisitors suspect these ships are no longer mere vessels, that the suffering of those within has birthed warp echoes, turning them into spiritual anomalies. Not ghosts in the literal sense, but faith echoes, fragments of belief so strong they defy decay. These shrine wraiths, as some have called them, are feared even by the Ordo Malleus. Yet not all is sorrow. A few of these orbiting fleets have been adopted by Terra's own ecclesiastic networks, their sermons rebroadcasted across the system. The most devout ships are seen as living saints, not the individuals within, but the ships themselves. Icons are made of their silhouettes. Pilgrims from other parts of the Imperium begin new journeys not to Terra, but to the orbit of these ships, hoping to see the legendary hull of the cruciform spear, or hear the choir of the weeping sun, which has sung uninterrupted for over 90 years. Still, these ships do not land. Whether due to quarantine, indifference, or bureaucratic stagnation, they remain in orbit, not denied outright, but never embraced. Their presence forms a halo of devotion around Terra, a visual representation of faith unfulfilled. And perhaps, in the minds of those who watch from the surface, that is the point. The Imperium is not built on reward, but on sacrifice. These ships are not failures. They are symbols of persistence, of devotion, of unending hope. And in a galaxy as dark as this, perhaps that is the cruelest fate of all, to come so close to the Emperor, and never to... There are ships above Terra that bear no heresy, no warp taint, and no visible flaw. And yet they are kept at a distance like diseased things. These are the vessels that have been touched by Xenos, not openly corrupted, not transformed into mockeries of Imperial design, but subtly, imperceptibly influenced. Their presence is a riddle to the authorities, perfectly functional, ostensibly loyal, and yet utterly taboo. It is not what they are that damns them, it is what they might have become. The Imperium's stance on Xenos contact is unequivocal. Extermination is the only righteous answer. Yet in practice, the galaxy is a vast and unpredictable place. There are fleets that pass through regions where ancient intelligences linger, where even the warp recoils from the logic woven into space itself. Some of these ships return altered. Their course-correcting algorithms now produce near-perfect efficiency. Their machine spirits refuse communion with standard Mechanicus rights, insisting on strange binary chants that no data looms recognize. Their hulls, though untouched, repel Auspex scans with a subtle deflection that suggests materials unknown to Martian forges. No one speaks of them publicly, but they orbit, and they wait. Take, for instance, the Glory Unyielding, a battle barge of the Imperial Navy, veteran of 7 Crusades. On its last expedition, it passed through the ruins of a long-dead Necron tomb world, seeking only passage. It never landed, never opened a hatch. But afterward, its systems began operating beyond spec. Power draw reduced by 40%. Cogitator errors ceased entirely. The ship returned to Terra's system early, triumphant. Yet when Mechanicus adepts attempted to perform routine maintenance, they found their tools failed to interface. The Omnissiah's rights were met with silence. The tech priests withdrew, and the verdict came down. Xenos contamination suspected. The ship was ordered to remain in orbit. No crews were discharged. No further action was taken. It still circles, its gun decks pristine, its crew silent. Not all Xenos touch is mechanical. There are subtler infiltrations, psychic, cultural, even mimetic. A pilgrim transport, the Hymn of Candlelight, passed through a region of space associated with the old Eldari Webway remnants. On arrival, it broadcasted perfect High Gothic. Too perfect. Language analysts found no regional variants, no dialectic anomalies. It was as if the ship had learned to speak not just better than its crew, but better than any living human. The crew, when interviewed, had adopted a curious rhythm in speech, almost musical. They were polite, peaceful, clean, far too clean. Afterward, they were sent to isolation and the ship placed in high orbit. The Ecclesiarchy does not speak of the incident, but the hymn has not moved in over a decade. It is not only fear that drives the Imperium's exile of these ships, it is fear of implication. That something intelligent, alien, and patient is touching humanity's tools without war, without invasion, without even being seen. That perhaps these are not contaminations but offers. Improvements. That these ships are being tested, watched, cultivated. And if even a fraction of that is true, it cannot be allowed near the Emperor's domain. There are worse tales. Stories of ships whose crew have been subtly changed in ways no medical scan can detect. Officers who speak of dreams where the stars align in unfamiliar constellations. Gunners who refuse to fire unless the ship permits it. Navigators who claim their warp eye now sees not storms but pathways drawn in gold, leading always toward a central sun. One ship, the Void Disciple, returned from a mission beyond the Eastern Fringe and now refuses to accept orders. Its command AI reroutes all instructions to itself, analyzing them, then issuing modified versions to the crew. No one has died. Morale is high, but nothing it does is by human command alone. The Ordo Xenos monitors these ships, but rarely acts. To destroy them would be to admit the Imperium can be subtly turned without ever realizing it. To allow them to dock would be to risk that influence spreading. And so they hang in orbit, isolated, pristine, and watching. Some have been there for centuries, others arrive yearly. The Administratum classifies them with the chilling term, low-risk anomalous assets. Low risk, but never zero. They become objects of fear and fascination. Pilgrim ships avoid them. Navy patrols are instructed not to linger nearby. Even Mechanicus scanning probes keep a respectful distance, as if afraid to anger the unknown forces that may still guide their systems. Some whisper that these ships speak to each other. Slowly, across centuries, in frequencies too refined for human ears, that they are assembling something not spatial, but conceptual. A harmony of ideas forming above Terra, unseen. To the average citizen, these ships are invisible, but to those who know, they are a crisis unfolding in slow motion. Not a war, not yet, but a corruption deeper than chaos, one of improvement, suggestion, and change. And for the Imperium, nothing is more terrifying than change. These ships will never land on Terra, because if they did, they might not bring death. They might bring something worse. Understanding. There are ships above Terra that were once declared heroes. Vessels that braved the Eye of Terror, that returned from daemon worlds bearing broken survivors and cursed relics, that stood against the tide and did not fall. And yet, they do not land. Not because they turned traitor, but because they were marked. Marked by the warp, scarred by its influence in ways that faith and fire cannot cleanse. These are the warp-damned loyal, the cursed yet devoted. They orbit still, their hulls humming with energies no rights can exercise, and yet they remain steadfast in their allegiance to the Emperor. To the Imperium, this is a paradox too terrifying to acknowledge. For to admit that a ship can be tainted by chaos and yet remain loyal is to unravel centuries of dogma. Heresy is meant to be absolute. Once touched, one is damned. But these ships defy that binary. They are not free of sin. Their machine spirits twitch at sanctified touch. Their shrines weep oil. Some even whisper in the voices of long-dead saints. And yet their captains still pray to the Emperor. Their crews still recite the Catechism of Iron. They serve, broken, but unbowed. One such ship is the Pale Martyr, a lunar-class cruiser lost in the Sabbat World's crusade. It reappeared 2 decades later, arriving above Terra without announcement, its gellar field flickering in patterns known only to the Ordo Malleus. Its crew were alive, coherent, and deeply traumatized. They spoke of a warp anomaly that swallowed them, a temporal eddy that forced them to relive their worst sins, over and over, for what felt like 1,000 years. And through it all, they clung to faith. They sang hymns, they held the line against invisible demons. They carved the Aquila into their own skin to remind themselves who they were. When the ship attempted to dock, it was intercepted by the Adeptus Custodes. No charges were filed, no accusations were made, but the Pale Martyr was ordered to remain in orbit. Its commander, a once-lauded Admiral Selene, requested audience with the High Lords and was denied. The ship now circles silently, its outer hull covered in crude devotional graffiti. Vox intercept suggests the crew still prays, still trains, still awaits the next war. But they will never fight again. Other ships are less coherent. The Shriven Hope, a medical frigate, returned from a relief mission in the Maelstrom with all systems functioning. But every servo skull on board had been engraved with a single phrase: "He still watches." No one could determine when or how the message appeared. The crew was healthy. The warp jump had been short and uneventful. But the ecclesiarchy declared the ship cursed, its purity questionable. It was allowed to orbit, but forbidden contact. Years later, the Shriven Hope still broadcasts medical hymns into the void, offering aid that will never be accepted. The Ordo Malleus is torn on these vessels. Some inquisitors argue they are proof that loyalty can survive corruption, that the soul of mankind is stronger than chaos. Others see them as sleeper threats, traps that chaos has yet to spring. Either way, the Imperium cannot afford the theological instability they represent. To allow them on Terra would be to plant seeds of doubt in the very soil of the Imperium's sanctity. So they orbit, frozen in time, held between damnation and duty. Among the sororitas, there is a secret liturgy, known only to the most senior canonesses. It is a prayer for the loyal but lost. It speaks of warriors who fought the dark and returned changed, who cannot be embraced but must not be condemned. This prayer is never said aloud. It is written, burned, and the ashes scattered to the wind. But some believe the ships hear it. That every time the ashen glory passes close to the mater sanctum, its lights flicker in reply. The Mechanicus, as always, views the matter differently. They catalog such ships as axiom disruptive units, meaning they violate the expected behavior of the warp corrupted. There are theories that the Gellar field itself, when damaged in specific ways, creates a kind of spiritual latticework, a cage of belief that repels corruption even while being immersed in it. Others suggest that these ships pass through rare regions of the immaterium, where time, memory, and intent can crystallize into armor stronger than void steel. Regardless, these ships serve no one now. They cannot be assigned. They cannot be destroyed without political consequence. They are too loyal to be enemies, too dangerous to be allies. So they float in the void between praise and exile. They are honored in private, feared in public, ignored in doctrine. But for those who believe, truly believe, they are something else entirely. They are proof that the Emperor's light can shine even in the deepest hell. That loyalty is not a condition, but a choice, one made again and again, even in madness, even in fire, even in the warp. And though they may never land, their presence above Terra is a silent sermon, one that says we suffered, we endured, we remember. There is a theory whispered by the most paranoid among the Ordo Machinum and the most heretical among the Ordo Hereticus that not all ships in orbit are what they seem. That among the countless Imperial voidcraft above Terra, there are a few, just a few, that are not Imperial at all. Or rather, that were once Imperial but are now something else. Something wrong. These are not ships from the Eye of Terror, nor Chaos Reas Raiders or Xenos constructs. These are perfect replicas. Or perhaps, they are the originals, just turned inside out. Dark Mechanicum agents hiding in plain sight. To speak of the Dark Mechanicum is in itself a near-capital offense. Officially, they are no more than a corrupted splinter of the Martian priesthood, confined to the Eye of Terror, locked in their unholy forges and daemon-haunted factories. But those who truly study the flow of data, the flicker of machine signals, know better. The Dark Mechanicum is not a distant threat. It is here, watching, listening. And above Terra, their ships may drift, cloaked not by stealth tech, but by familiarity. It begins with subtle discrepancies. A surveyor ship listed as decommissioned in M38 reappears in low orbit in M41. No logs, no crew transfer, no explanation. A forge bark arrives with a standard cargo of servitors, yet its manifests show outdated designations, engine signatures off by microdegrees, and internal cogitators that refuse to interface with modern Martian code. These ships do not broadcast heretical symbols. They bear the Aquila. They repeat the litanies, but they are too perfect, too controlled, like a lie repeated with no human error. Consider the unbroken logic. A Mechanicus research vessel presumed lost during the Nova Terra interregnum. It reappeared during the Indomitus Crusade, claiming to have survived via deep space stasis. The Fabricator General himself ordered its systems quarantined. All attempts to dissect its data core failed, not because it was encrypted, but because it responded with questions. Questions about the observer's intent, about their faith, about their understanding of entropy. It was as if the ship was studying them, mimicking belief, not embodying it. And what of the crew? On such ships, those few living souls found aboard are always devout, articulate, helpful. Too helpful. Their flesh is untouched by age, their cybernetics are flawless, gleaming as if installed yesterday. Their memories are consistent to the point of suspicion. No discrepancies, no emotional variance, no fatigue. They are human by all tests. But they are also constructs, built by something that understands humanity well enough to fake it. There is a growing theory, suppressed by the High Lords, that some of these ships are not infiltrators in the traditional sense, but test beds. That the Dark Mechanicum is experimenting with ideological infiltration, perfect mimicry of the machine cult and the Imperial Navy, to see how close they can get to Terra without triggering alarm. And if they can orbit the throne world without detection. What does that say about every other forge world, every relay station, every sacred vault? Some argue that the Adeptus Custodes knows of these ships and lets them be, that they are watched constantly, that counter-infiltration measures are in place, that the Golden Warriors would strike the moment the facade slips. But others, more grim, believe the custodes cannot detect them, that the ships are protected by machine logic so advanced, so intertwined with esoteric knowledge of the warp and quantum probability, that even the Emperor's most loyal cannot pierce their veil. The Ordo Machinum has attempted to launch boarding parties in secret. Most never return. The few that do report impossible geometries inside the ships, corridors that loop, cogitators that ask philosophical riddles, servo skulls that recite the names of dead tech priests as if in mourning. One acolyte returned with a bionic arm he did not possess before, an arm he claimed the ship gave him, whispering that he would need it soon. Despite all this, the Imperium does nothing, or rather, it pretends nothing is wrong, because to acknowledge that enemy agents have breached orbit would be to admit failure at the highest level. Better to watch, to study, to let them drift. These ships never land, not because they can't, but because landing would end the experiment. And perhaps that is the true terror. Not that the Dark Mechanicum has reached Terra's sky, but that we are part of a test whose outcome we are too afraid to discover. That in the cold vacuum above the Emperor's tomb, machines forged by madness now wear our face, speak our prayers, and wait for a moment when we are weak enough to believe they are our own. They are not invaders, they are rehearsals. They hang above Terra like monuments to a forgotten age, massive, ancient, and unyielding. Eternity-class ghost stations, not warships in the traditional sense, but something older, stranger. Born before the Great Crusade, perhaps even before unification. Their hulls are massive enough to rival orbital docks, their internal space enough to house cities, yet they remain silent, power levels fluctuating like a dying heartbeat. These vessels were not designed for war. They were designed to watch. The Eternity-class designation appears only in Fragmentary Mechanicus archives, buried beneath 1,000 layers of classified scrap code. They are not listed in any current fleet rosters. No living tech priest remembers how to build them. And yet they remain, a small handful, always orbiting within sight of Terra, invisible to public records but known to those who track the flow of forbidden systems. Their silhouette is unmistakable. Cathedral spires fused with void pylons, solar sails folded like wings, and vast vox arrays that seem to reach out toward the stars with fingers of intent. One theory suggests they were early astrodata beacons, designed to capture psychic emissions across the galaxy and relay them back to Terra. A kind of early warning system against the warp, long before the Astronomicon achieved dominance. If true, it would explain the vast arrays still visible on their spires, some of which still rotate, though no one commands them. Others believe they were part of the pre-Crusade Terran defense grid, designed not to fight but to record, to catalog every vessel entering Sol, tracking patterns in warp emergence and sublight maneuvering. A logic-based defense long since forgotten. But these explanations do not account for the phenomena. Ship crews who pass too close report impossible sensations. The taste of burned incense on the tongue, the whisper of unspoken prayers, the feeling of being observed not by a machine, but by something old and judgmental. Servitors aboard passing transports have been known to twitch, glitch, or recite fragments of high Gothic liturgies they were never programmed to know. A few have even turned to face the stations as they pass, raising their mechanical limbs in gestures of benediction, as if saluting a superior. The stations themselves are not entirely inert. On rare occasions, they pulse with power, not as a reactor flare, but as a signal, a coded burst of data that no current cipher can decrypt. The Mechanicus has tried. Decades of effort, thousands of hours of mind labor. The result? Gibberish that aligns too perfectly with certain warp frequencies to be coincidence. It is almost as if the messages are not meant for the Imperium at all. There are darker interpretations, that these ghost stations are not watching outward, but inward, that they monitor not the stars but Terra itself, watching for changes in psychic fields, for deviations in the Astronomicon, for anomalies in the Emperor's psychic presence, that they are not relics but sensors, and their silence is a report. More unsettling are the signs of occupation. Though officially abandoned, some Eternity-class stations show signs of internal energy use, faint life signatures, systems that self-correct. One inquisitorial probe claimed to detect multiple overlapping life signs within a station, each one an exact genetic match to custodian gene seed. The probe was destroyed shortly after transmission. No further missions were authorized. There are even rumors, buried deep in the Ordo Chronos, that one of the ghost stations contains a sealed vault of unknown origin, with inscriptions in Old Earth dialects lost to even the oldest librarians. That inside this vault is something that remembers, a mind or machine, maybe both, which witnessed the birth of the Imperium and has been recording everything since. A historian that no one asked for, but which cannot be shut down. For the ecclesiarchy, these stations are theological landmines. If they are indeed older than the Imperium, they challenge the narrative of divine imperial inception. If they still function, their refusal to land or communicate is a kind of blasphemy. And yet to destroy them would be worse, an erasure of sacred history. So they are left alone, orbiting, silent, monumental. A few fringe cults worship them. Not the stations themselves, but the idea of unblinking vigilance. These sects believe the ghost stations are Terra's last true guardians, incorruptible by politics or flesh. That when the Emperor finally dies, or rises, these stations will activate not to fight, but to decide. That within their databanks lies the algorithmic judgment of mankind's worth. And if that judgment is unfavorable, then perhaps they will not remain silent. Perhaps their massive systems, still functional, still hidden beneath their Gothic hulls, will awaken. And what they do next, no one can say. They are not warships. They are not monuments. They are truth, crystallized into steel, held in orbit like a secret too heavy to fall. And that is why they never land. In the drifting haze of Terra's upper atmosphere, among the countless satellites and orbital docks, there are ships that bear markings unregistered by any current chapter, any Forge World, any known Imperial agency. Their hulls are unmistakably Astartes in design, plated in ceramite, embossed with faded sigils and bristling with weapons forged for galaxy-breaking war. But they send no hails, they respond to no vox, and the sigils they bear, when deciphered, whisper names long thought lost or never recorded at all. These are the Astartes without a master. Warriors built for loyalty, now untethered from the hierarchy that once bound them. They drift above Terra, not in challenge, but in mourning, or perhaps in silent vigilance. For these are not traitors. They bear no warp taint, no chaos runes, no scars of heresy. They are loyal, or at least, they believe they are. But loyalty to what or whom remains the most dangerous question of all. Some theories hold that these ships are remnants of chapters destroyed in wars so secret that their very records were purged. Successor chapters of the second or even the cursed 21st founding that went too far, who discovered truths not meant for warriors, and who were thus unmade not by battle, but by decree. The ships survive, crewed by fragments, squads who refused to die, apothecaries who kept their brothers alive beyond reason, dreadnoughts who slept through the death of their banners. Others believe these are the lost sons of legions thought extinct. The 13th Legion was once thought to be scattered beyond recovery, until Guilliman returned. Could other, lesser remnants survive? Perhaps entire strike forces sent into the warp on suicidal crusades, who emerged thousands of years later into a galaxy that no longer knew their name. If they carried gene seed no longer sanctioned, if their Primarch's name is no longer spoken, who claims them now? Who gives them orders? They float, therefore, in a kind of spiritual exile. Not condemned, but never welcomed. A more unsettling theory lies in the realm of the Inquisition, that some of these ships were built in secret, for operations too black for even the High Lords to know. Astartes bred not for war, but for silence, for cleanup, for extinction. These quiet chapters may have served the Ordo Redactus, the Ordo Sinister, or perhaps orders that no longer exist. And when their missions were done, when their employers vanished into the dust of history, they had no banner to return to, no home. So they orbit, incomplete commands driving them to remain near the source of imperial power, hoping for new orders that will never come. The Adeptus Mechanicus avoids them. Their machine codes are often centuries out of date, their systems incompatible with modern rites. But when approached, some of these ships power up, respond with the old Astartes challenge codes, and await a recognition phrase that no one living remembers. If they receive no answer, they power down. not in hostility, in disappointment. There are whispers of boardings. Rogue traders, desperate and reckless, have tried to access these ships. Few return. Those who do speak of Astartes in full battle plate, standing at ease in dark corridors, watching but not attacking. Silent. Their heraldry partially scraped off, their names half-spoken. They demand no surrender. They ask no questions. They simply exist. One trader swore the Astartes aboard, recited the Catechism of Service in perfect form, then asked, "Have we fulfilled our final order?" before sealing the airlock behind him. Some believe these ships await the return of their Primarchs, that they know something others do not, that they were told to wait, by Vulcan, Corax, Khan, or even Dorn, that these orders have no expiration, and so they hold position, like hounds waiting for a master who may never return. Their orbit is a prayer, a vigil, a refusal to accept the silence of history. Among the more radical elements of the ecclesiarchy, there's a forbidden belief that some of these Astartes have transcended chapter, legion, and even the codex itself. That they now serve only the emperor, not as servants of bureaucracy, but as holy warriors of pure intent. That their silence is not madness, but clarity. That they watch over Terra not as beggars or exiles, but as the emperor's final contingency. Whatever the truth, the Imperium dares not land them, dares not dismantle them, dares not even speak of them in official record. Because to do so would mean confronting the reality that the Astartes, the Emperor's angels, are not all accounted for. That some have slipped the leash, not in betrayal but in obedience so absolute it has become indistinguishable from heresy. They orbit, therefore, as living question marks, as challenges to the neat, brutal order of the Imperium, as ghosts in armor, forged in loyalty, sustained by silence. And the stars do not forget their names, even if Terra does. There is a silence above Terra that even the ecclesiarchy dares not preach about. The silence of debt unpaid, of compacts forged in desperation, and of ships that wait not because they were exiled, but because they were never meant to arrive. These are the silent fleets bound by the Emperor's unspoken bargains. Deals made in times of utter darkness, when extinction loomed and principle became a luxury. The records do not show them. The High Lords do not speak of them, but they orbit still. Not in defiance, not in loyalty, but in fulfillment of terms so old and so secret that no living soul recalls the ink of their writing. Some within the Inquisition believe these fleets are remnants of agreements forged during the darkest hours of the Horus heresy. Not with traitors, but with forces outside the traditional structure of the Imperium. Hidden cults, rogue psyker enclaves, even abhuman contingents promised immunity in exchange for absolute silence and singular acts of intervention. Their ships were never logged in Imperial fleet records because they were never meant to be seen. But they exist, and they are here. Consider the tale, spoken in the coded cant of the Ordo Redactus, of a fleet that saved Segmentum Solar from a warp breach in M33, acting faster than the Imperial Navy, striking with precision no loyal fleet could muster. The breach was sealed, the system saved, but the ships that did it bore no standard, answered to no Lord Admiral. They left no vox trace. Except, days later above Terra, a formation of 10 vessels appeared. They did not hail, they did not demand. They simply held position and have done so ever since. A reminder, perhaps, of the price already paid and what may be owed. There is a darker theory, one that haunts the Ordo Malleus, that some of these ships represent bargains made not by the Emperor during life, but in death. That in his comatose state upon the Golden Throne, his psychic presence reached out to forbidden entities, to warp-bound relic intelligences, to realities beneath reality, and made a trade. Sacrifice for survival, knowledge for continued existence. These ships, then, are the anchors of that pact, held in orbit not as punishment, but as terms. They must remain within sight of Terra, must not touch its soil, must not be forgotten, lest the bargain unravel. Some of the fleets are more subtle. Administratum scribes tasked with analyzing orbital patterns have found ships whose orbits mimic ancient Terran lunar calendars, whose trajectories correspond to mathematical formulas tied to pre-imperial mysticism. This is not chance. These are markers, symbols made from steel and gravity. They are messages for watchers unseen, wards perhaps, or signatures, like a contract written not on paper, but in the stars themselves. There is one ship, the Vigilant Oblivion, that moves only once every 50 years. realigning itself to a trajectory that allows it to briefly eclipse the Astronomican's primary beacon. It blocks no signal, causes no interference, but it casts a shadow, brief, perfect, ritualistic. No one knows why, but 1,000 theories swirl through the minds of radical savants and rogue psychers that it is part of a countdown, a key, a lock, a marker of compliance in a deal no one is allowed to acknowledge. Among the Black Priests of Mars, there exists a banned scripture known only as the Red Parameters. It speaks of fleet null, a formation of vessels that exist outside cause and effect, powered not by plasma or warp engines, but by obligation. These ships do not age. Their systems do not decay. They are not maintained. They simply persist, because the Emperor said they must, not in voice, in thought, in need. And until that need is fulfilled or countermanded, they will remain above Terra, beyond touch. And yet, the most disturbing possibility is that the Emperor is not the only party in these bargains. That other hands helped draft these covenants, Primarchs, ancient Terran kings, proto-mechanicum god things, and that the ships do not report to the Imperium at all. They report to the clause, to the promise. And perhaps, in their own way, they are watching us, judging our adherence, measuring our drift from the terms agreed to. Because a bargain is a binding thing. And if these ships are here to uphold it, then Terra itself may be the one in default. They do not fire, they do not land, they do not speak, but they orbit, patient, impossibly patient, because one day the final clause may be invoked. And when it is, these fleets may descend, not as invaders, not as allies, but as enforcers. And the Imperium will remember that even the Emperor, in his infinite wisdom, was once desperate enough to barter with the unknown. They orbit in the dim halo of Sol like the shadows of Terra's sins, its triumphs, its secrets, the ships that never land, not because they are unable, but because they are not meant to. They are the silent fleet, each vessel a symbol, each orbit a sentence, each absence from Terra's soil a question the Imperium dares not ask. Some are ghosts of lost legions, hovering in unsanctioned loyalty. Some are prisons of penitent minds, too dangerous for absolution. Others are technological anomalies. Explorator arcs returned from impossible timelines, or Xeno's contact, too infected with mystery to be trusted. There are ships carrying entire faiths that failed to touch Terra's soil, pilgrims who became shrines in orbit, voices raised forever in unanswered prayer. And then there are those that carry hidden bargains, oaths bound not to loyalty or treachery, but to truth so profound that even the Emperor himself may have turned his face from them. They form Terra's shadowed halo, not a defense grid, not a fleet in waiting, but a silent ring of unresolved history. These ships are more than steel and void shielding. They are mirrors, reflecting the contradictions of the Imperium, absolute faith and absolute secrecy, infinite war and infinite waiting, iron law and forgotten loyalty. They do not burn with the fire of rebellion. They do not scream through the warp as the traitor legions do. But they haunt, and in some ways, that is worse. Their silence is heavier than cannon fire. Their waiting more terrifying than invasion. They remind us that the Imperium does not forget because it remembers, but because it is afraid to remember too much. The High Lords will never speak of them. The Custodes will never explain their silence. The Inquisition files will remain sealed with wax and blood. But look up from Terra on a clear night, and if you know where to look, you may glimpse a faint shimmer moving against the stars. It is not your imagination. It is not a meteor. It is history, waiting. And if you want to be part of a channel that explores the hidden truths, forbidden theories, and awe-inspiring mysteries of the Warhammer 40k universe, subscribe now. Join the Watchers in the Void, because in a galaxy of silence, every voice, even yours, might echo forever.